Hello and welcome to MalMakes. Today we're doing a painting based off of the video game To the Moon. For this piece, I'm showing River and Johnny watching the lighthouse Anya in the moonlight. This is the long version. If you're interested in the time-lapse version, you can click on the card here. Otherwise, let's get started. I've begun by sketching out in the sketchbook. I have the lighthouse, the moon, I'm going to be putting some clouds in, and then I have just the edge of the cliff. I'm going to be putting River and Johnny sitting on a log down at the bottom. So now I'm going to take this and transfer it to my canvas. I'm starting by giving myself a center line so I can keep it very symmetrical between the two halves. For the sky, I started by painting it straight blue, and that was a bad idea. It's very, very bright. It does not really fit the mood I want. So what I've done is I've taken blue and I've mixed it in with some of this orange here to kind of tone it down a little bit. It's a little bit dimmer and it's not quite so overpoweringly blue. So I'm going to be using this color for the sky. Now that the sky is done, I'm concerned that this blue is going to show through when I start painting the moon, so I just have pure titanium white, and I'm going to go ahead and just fill in that moon shape back, so I don't have to worry about that blue showing through later and causing trouble. For the details, I've mixed up a variety of grays. I have pure white, a light gray, a darker gray, and then I have black. I don't expect to use pure black. I expect to be able to mix it in with this to darken this up if I want something in between. I'm going to be using these to make the craters on the moon. I'm going to try and just get some details in and just kind of freehand a bunch of craters to give it some detail and some depth so it's just not a white circle sitting in the sky. Now that I've filled in these shapes, I'm using a little bit of that darker gray to kind of give it some depth in certain areas. So I'm putting it down into the craters, and then I'm just kind of blurring it out between the two, so it's just not a harsh line. Like so. Or in that case, apparently I'll get rid of it entirely, so I may need to bring some more back. Now I'm going to obscure what I've done, and I have three new types of paint. I have a shading gray from Golden High Flow, so it's super liquid. It's really drippy and it gets everywhere. I also have the same thing but with titanium white, so it's High Flow. And then I also have a zinc white fluid acrylics, which is kind of a bit thicker. It's a bit more like cream instead of the heavy body paints that are just super, super thick. And I decided to get those because I've been doing a lot of glazing, and I thought they would be good because you don't have to water them down as much and they'll stick to the canvas better. So I've kind of mixed the titanium and the shading gray together, and I'm going to kind of just give a nice big coat to the whole moon, and I know that's going to seem kind of strange, but I will be bringing the highlights back in later. So I'm just going to give the whole thing this nice gray to kind of obscure some of it. Now that that's dried, I'm going to fill in the highlights, and I'm using the fluid acrylic and zinc white. So it's a lot thinner. What I'm going to do is I'm kind of going to do the opposite of what I did with the gray and just kind of take it from the edge of the canvas. As that dries, I'm going to begin to bring more and more of the white glaze on top, just to kind of tone it back, because I had wanted sort of these crater shapes to blend into the outside, but I kind of want the whole thing lighter in general. So I'm going to keep bringing these glazing layers in as it dries, and as I work on everything else. And at some point when it's a lot drier, I am going to give it kind of a blue cast with a blue glaze. I've put more zinc white over the moon. I wanted it to be a bit grayer overall, so I had done the gray. I wanted it to then be toned down, so then I did the zinc white. I'm letting that dry before I move on to more moon stuff. In the meantime, I've gone and mixed up my cloud color, and it's going to be here. It's very similar to the sky color. That's totally fine. I have my colors making orange, and I use that to tone down my cyan blue, and then I made a tint and then a shade of it so I can start to bring in some of the value for the clouds. And I'm actually going to start opposite of where the moon is, because I'm going to need to go and do more here later. So I'll start down here and kind of skip my way around and saving that part for last. So I tried doing this cloud and I'm not very happy with it, so I'm going to try doing this one a different way and see if it turns out any better. I think that cloud looks a lot better. So how I did it is I started with that medium blue I showed you earlier, and I kind of painted most of the cloud that way. And then I took my dark shade and I kind of streaked it through the middle of the cloud to kind of give this like darkness to the middle of it. Then I took pure white and I kind of did some of the edges. Not too many, I wasn't trying to outline it too much, but just a little. And then I took all the paints that were still here while they were wet and I pulled them all kind of across each other to tone down the white and to even out all the tones. So I think that cloud looks a lot better than this one is, so I'm going to repaint this one once it's a bit drier. I might move on to this one for now. So as you can see, I filled in with that medium blue, and then I brought some black or that dark blue on top and kind of blended them together. And then I did sort of an outline with the white. And then while everything is still wet, I'm going to kind of streak them both back and forth to just kind of even out all my tones. So what I've done is I've mixed up a green, and I tried to get something straight in the middle of our green section on the color wheel. And I did that because it's going to be a really nice base. I'm going to be bringing in grass strokes later, once I sort of have this in and it's dry. And I'm not putting them everywhere on the grass. So I wanted to do it this way, because then I have a nice solid base foundation that if I don't like later, it's easy to change, but it's also going to fill in a lot of the blank canvas, and that'll help us out later. The original green I used was too yellow, so I mixed up a blue-green and went right back over the top while it was still wet. They kind of combined and you can see both, and I really like how it looks. It's pretty cool, and it's going to make a great base for the grass later. As for this cliff, I started filling it in with burnt sienna, but I'm realizing it needs to really be a lot grayer. So I kind of mixed up a gray and the burnt sienna, and I'm just going to use that as the base for this little bit of a cliff here. So I'm going to start working on the lighthouse. I've mixed up some light yellow, but first I need to go ahead and fill in with titanium white, just to make sure everything's covered because there's a lot of dark colors and I want to make sure they're not showing through. For the cap of the lighthouse, I have a few different colors. I have white, a light blue-gray, a dark blue-gray, and then black. It's kind of lighter up towards the top here, and then it starts to get darker towards that dark blue-gray, and I just have black to add in a little bit of shading if I need it. Now that the yellow has dried, I've been using black to bring in some of the grading across the light. And I'm just trying to be very, very careful with a tiny little brush. Trying to make sure my vertical lines are perfectly vertical. And I'm just pulling straight down all the way across. I'm going to continue working on the lighthouse, and I've mixed up two colors. I took burnt sienna and the titanium white here, and then I took that and added a touch of blue to it over here. And that's going to sort of function as sort of the base layer for the ring around the light, and it kind of has this rust for it, so that's kind of what this is. So I'm just going to kind of use both of these and some of the pure burnt sienna, and maybe I'll mix some of that with the blue to use as my shadows. For the top part of the lighthouse, I took the color I have here along the base of the support, and I mixed it with a bit more white and a little bit more sienna to kind of get this bluish, greenish, brownish light color. And I'm going to use this for the left side of the lighthouse, and the left side of the lighthouse is a bit lighter than the middle, and the right side is even darker. So I'm going to kind of just go a little bit darker and a little bit darker as it goes around the side, because if you think of the moon shining on this side, it's going to make this side a lot lighter. So I'm going to fill this in for the top half, kind of cut it off about here, which is kind of where I drew that line earlier, and then I'm going to go to another darker and another darker. So as you can see, I've made this color a little bit darker just by adding some of the pure original color back in, and I'm going to use that for this middle panel of the lighthouse. Now I've been using the same blues to kind of bring in the windowsill, and they look a bit funny now, but they're pitch black on the inside, so I'm going to let them dry with what I've done, and then I'll fill them in and they'll really come together. For the bottom of the lighthouse, it does change to another color. It's actually very similar to this brown I made up here, so I'm going to take that brown again, which was basically burnt sienna and titanium white, but this time I added a little bit of my primary magenta into it, so it's a bit pinker. And I'm going to use this main color I just have here for the center panel of the lighthouse. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to use this as the main color, and then I'm going to mix it up lighter for over here and then darker for over here. The lighthouse is pretty much done. I have to get this tree in here and, I don't know, maybe a couple other things, but it's pretty much done. I'm gonna go on and start painting this cliff, and I've mixed up my colors. I have white, black, I made a gray, I have my burnt sienna, and my cyan. And I've gone with these three grays. They kind of have some burnt sienna and a little bit of the cyan in them. They were too warm with that burnt sienna. It was like chocolate and not moonlight cliff rock face color, so I decided to add a little bit of that to it. I'm just going to kind of use these to block in some shapes, maybe add a little bit of highlights with white, and that's kind of going to be it for the cliff. I've blocked in my rock shapes with that medium gray, and I'm going to take a darker gray, and I'm going to use that to start to fill in between and some of those shadows. I finished the rock face, and it's really random. I think it looks great. It does wrap around the side and the bottom. You'll also notice I filled in a little bit of grayish brown along the log. There's a little bit of dirt that sits in there in the game, and I forgot about it, so I just kind of went back over the top. As for the grass, I've made up a few different colors. I kind of have more of a blue-green here, a regular green here, and then I kind of took that, mixed it in with more yellow and some white to make a light green. I'm going to use all three for the grass, but I'm going to start with the very, very lightest one. And I'm just going to kind of randomly throw in some brush strokes to stand in for grass. And I'm just going to kind of put all of those there, then I'll go into the medium green and kind of put a few more in, and then I'll go into the darkest green and put a few more of those in. I finished up the texture of the grass, and I like it. I like the texture of it, I like how it flows. I'm not quite in love with it yet, I don't know, I may need to bring in those darker greens still. In the meantime, I'm going to move on to this tree. I'm going to start to fill it in with this darker green and kind of give it a good base layer. It's kind of shaped like a rose, and then I'm going to bring in the lighter greens to bring the highlights on. For the tree, as you can see, I filled in with a dark color, then I took the medium and started to build in some of the edges of the branches. Then I took the light color and kind of just built upon them. I went back to the dark color and I just tapped in on a few of the places just to bring that deep color back. So I have this nice tree that has a lot of different greens in it. Finish up with most of the green, I'm going to start to fill in the bases for where the flowers go. I'm just going to use the greens I have and kind of do one of these numbers. It's almost like a little firework to just kind of give a nice little base for the flowers to sit on. I'm ready to move on to the flowers, and I'm going to make one batch pink, so I have a light pink and then kind of a darker pink, and I'm going to make the other batch purple. This one's going to be my base, and then this darker one is going to be just for the shadows. So I have this base here, I'm going to make this one pink, and I'm going to make this one purple. I'm just doing a little bit of touch-up stuff now. The center of these flowers is orange, and originally I made it just slightly too dark, so I'm just going to tap some yellow on top. Kind of make them stand out a little bit. For the center of the purple flowers, I'm going to use just that pure dark purple I had before. For these far flowers over here, I've mixed up a yellow. Well, I didn't mix it up, I pulled it out of the jar, but I did mix up an orange. I'm going to use both to bring those flowers in. Now it's time to work on the log. I've mixed up 3 colors using titanium white, Mars black, and burnt sienna. This one has a lot of white, this one's kind of an equal mix of all 3, and this one has a lot more black than the other 2. So those are going to be kind of my base layers to bring in my highlights and my tints and shades. I'm going to redraw it in first because I've completely lost it and painted over half of it, but then I'll get started painting. For the log, it's really important that I kind of leave streaks between all my colors. So I did sort of the shadow, kind of where it folds over here. And it's kind of a darker brown, so I just kind of left it the pure sienna. But the top gets really, really gray in the moonlight. So I'm going to kind of leave that color that I'm filling in right now as my base, and use my darker shade of it to bring in some streaks and use the highlights to bring in other streaks. It's finally time to start filling in River and Johnny, and I'm going to start with him on the left here. So I've mixed up this green that's going to stand in for his pants. I'm going to use a little bit of black to just sort of bring in the value on the edges, and maybe just a touch of white to bring in some highlights. Next up is the vest, and I mixed up a little bit of burnt sienna with some titanium white, and I threw a little bit of yellow in there too, just to kind of make it a little bit more gold. So I'm going to just try and fill in the vest with this as a base color and then bring in some value. For Johnny's hair, I've mixed up a little bit of burnt sienna with a little bit of Mars black to kind of give me this super, super, super dark brown. And I'm going to use that as the base with a little bit of black to kind of bring in the strands of hair. I've also mixed it in with a little bit of white to kind of make a lighter color for the highlights. But this is going to kind of be that base. I finished up most of Johnny's details. I need to let his hair dry before I bring in more strands. I was going to do some shadows on his hands, but it's probably best if I just leave them alone until I get Rivers in. In the meantime, speaking of her, I'm going to start filling in her dress, and it's kind of a bluish violet. So I mixed that up, I added a little bit of white, and I'm going to kind of use that as my base. And it doesn't have too much showing because her hair is so long. You can probably tell, but I painted a little bit of white around both of their bottoms. I think I made them too big originally, so I put white there first, and then I'll bring in some more log color. In the meantime, I'm going to try working on River's hair, and I've tried a few different colors. I've tried this quinacridone, nickel azo gold, I've tried orange, I've tried kind of a pink orange, I've tried burnt sienna with orange. So I'm going to kind of just use all of those mixes of colors. I think the pinkish orange is the one I want. The very last thing I decided to do was put a couple stars in the sky, like 5 or 6. I think the blue is kind of overwhelming, and I think it'll just kind of tone that down. So I'm going to start with fluid zinc white and golden, kind of just as a good base, just to give them a little bit of glow, kind of like I've done the moon. I'm just going to kind of drop a few of them in. I think that really helps. So now I'm going to take titanium white and just kind of go straight in the middle of all of them and just give them another dot right in the middle. Just so they're a bit more solid. Anyway, I wanted to say, I was really excited for To the Moon. I hadn't heard much about it. I had tried to play it once, and Steven stopped me. He said, no, we're gonna do a Let's Play of it. So I hadn't gotten very far originally. But I really loved the game, I loved A Bird's Story, and I'm really excited for Finding Paradise because it's been announced, and it's coming soon, and I just can't wait to play it. So I'm just gonna finish up these stars. There we go, that helps bring the whole thing together. And we're done! We have Johnny and River sitting on a log under the moonlight. If you're interested in this piece, you can bid on the original canvas, or buy a print or a poster. There's links below. Otherwise, thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes, and I'll see you again here on MalMakes for another video game painting.